All right. Hello, everyone. It's Jason Fierno here representing the Mining Mavericks. The Mining Mavericks are a curated group of industry leaders who are passionate about making the industry better and more sustainable for everyone. Today, I'm fortunate enough to be joined by Ken Murray of Captrix Consulting. Ken is currently the founder and CEO of Captrix. He's also the VP of Engineering for Inspire Resources. Welcome to the Mining Mavericks, Ken. I'm excited to have you here today. How you doing?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Happy to be here and really keen to talk about some interesting topics.
Yeah, excellent. Ken, I saw you recently on the Canadian Institute of Mining Global Symposium, and I really enjoyed your presentation on the progression of EPCM management companies throughout the industry. It opened my eyes to a lot of things, and also I agreed with a lot of the concepts that you presented. Why don't you tell me a bit about how that presentation came to fruition?
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for the kind words, Jason. How that originated is, I've been in the mining industry pretty much my whole career, and in the project space specifically. And you reach a point in your life where you think to yourself, why do we keep on repeating the same mistakes over and over? And so I consider myself to be a bit of a systems thinker. And once you step back and start to understand the connections between all these different outcomes and understand what's driving it, you start to understand that this is generally what's happening in the mining project space is not an outcome of people willingly choosing to do certain things. It's an outcome of the system kind of driving those behaviors. And so, we see that a lot in the mining industry, and we're only just kind of starting to unpack that and understand it all so that we can fix it. So the premise behind that all was that, the EPCM model arose out of the need to outsource because projects are transitory. And that's really a commercial decision. And then from that, they kind of then assembled outsourced teams, different companies. And then that obviously changed the dynamic in terms of incentives and kind of how people make money, and the behavior started shifting. But aligned to that, the industry started to get competitive. And finally, the engineering function is kind of being commoditized recently. And so, that has got a whole lot of negative outcomes, which, are, again, they're all kind of interrelated to each other and other things. And so that presentation was really just trying to highlight some of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really good. And I've shared it with a few others because I think it does a really good job of telling the story of how the genesis behind the contractor market and the changes to the mining industry. Maybe the best place to start, apologize for throwing you out there, but maybe you could just give us a bit of a background on where you came from in the industry, because I know you've got an interesting career, but you've also got a lot of foundation within the space with what I think is great. So why don't you give us some color around that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. So I started out, studying mechanical engineering, and I really didn't see where this was all going at a point. And I dropped out and I went back into industry and became a draftsman. And so I really kind of started as a tradesperson, in fact. And so I started to already see how the industry wasn't doing things great, and there's a lot of room for optimization and innovation and that sort of thing. And so eventually, once I understood what a mechanical engineer eventually did, is I went back to university, finished my degree, and then got into the project space. And in fact, I started with the equipment supplier. So you kind of learn a lot of lessons around supply chain and that sort of thing at suppliers. I then moved into the EPCM side of the industry, executing projects, and kind of worked my way up through the ranks, through being project engineer and project manager and so on. And then reached the point, after many, many years in 2014, where we had a big tank in the mining industry again, considering, all my options. And I went and joined Accenture as a management consultant, and they're big into technology, and so I got exposed to a whole range of different digital technologies, and also different thinking in terms of just management, etc., which really opened my eyes to, again, the possibilities that are out there, and how to make use of those. And so, at a point, my engineer in me said, look, I need to get back into kind of more the technical realm and start to apply some of this. And so I went back into the industry, and then again, saw that nothing had changed. And so I eventually started my own business. And so Captrix is here to do exactly that, is to do things better in both the project management space and also the technology space.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's really great that you have that foundational knowledge as a draftsman, and then working with an OEM, working with a consultant. It's a really diverse background, not to mention the time that you spent with DRA in South Africa. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, DRA, I later discovered, is quite a different company to the rest of the EPCMs out there. And I was fortunate enough to kind of come through the ranks through a real bull cycle in the market. And so there's plenty of opportunities. There was also, plenty of execution projects out there. And so you kind of just move from one to the next to the next. And I eventually became a sort of a problem solver, and I could put on the most challenging projects. And it was good because you kind of come in halfway, and you can see the problem straight away, and you got to be pragmatic. You can't just be a theorist, and so you kind of got to put in things into place and let some things go, but that it's not highest risk, and eventually you get the project back on track. And I was saying to someone the other day, it was quite interesting because, in those roles, you never were shining as like, okay, we're ahead of schedule and ahead of budget all the time, but you had clawed back from being like 20% behind to kind of being on time. And so, you weren't seen as like knocking it out the park, but in fact, you had really done well to claw it all back from a pretty bad place.
Yeah,
But
sure.
just going back to how DRA was kind of different, is the way projects are executed down there is slightly different to North America.
Sure.
And the reliance on engineers down there, I think, is a lot heavier to be generalists across a project. And so I got exposed to a lot of the integration thinking around, we're trying to deliver a project here. We're not trying to deliver a specific deliverable in a discipline. And so a lot of thinking I've later then realized, is really good thinking, and it's missing from the North American market. And so that's what I'm trying to, install here, and bring that thinking to drive better outcomes for projects.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, but I understand exactly what you're saying. So instead of sitting in a home office being a lead piping engineer, you're in the field solving problems and working on supply chain and logistics and procurement type stuff, just different aspects of the business. So that's really good exposure. Why do you think there's that difference? Where do you think that comes from?
It's a company culture, I think, and it's also maybe a geographical culture as well. In that, if you go to other companies, they're not just specifically DRA. I think they all operate in a similar basis there. But if you go to Australia, they do things differently as well, and in North America they do it differently. So what I learned from that is that if you take your focus off of the end goal, which is achieving the project budget, schedule, etc., etc., and you don't have everyone aligned to that specifically, you're going to have a tough time, creating those outcomes. So there, I mean, to use your example, is engineers were given a certain section or area of a project, and you delivered that from cradle to grave. And so you went through engineering, you're responsible for procuring all your stuff in that area. Yes, you had people supporting you with the commercial aspects and so on, but you were responsible ultimately. And then you were also responsible for getting that constructed on site. Although there's a construction team that were driving the contractors and all the rest of it, you as an individual then responsible, make sure that, look, this is integrated with everything, it works correctly, and when you push the green button, everything works. So I think it's a great culture.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I enjoy listening to it because there are a lot of theorists in academia within the market that say one thing or say another, but haven't actually lived it and breathed it. And for you, with your experience, I know you've had the opportunity to do that, and that really substantiates to me your knowledge and your expertise. So I really appreciate that about your upbringing in the industry. With that, you've talked a lot about innovation, you've talked a lot about collaboration, and I think we share a lot of the same thoughts, at least relative to collaboration. I'm not smart enough to think about innovation, but what do you see now? Like, what's your focus from an innovation standpoint, and what's your focus from a collaboration standpoint? So two questions there.
Yeah, so I think that falls into the innovation category of what we're doing. And so we're trying to help innovation be deployed into mining projects and in operations. And so in order to do that, you can't be an expert at everything. You need to collaborate. And so, we're constantly speaking to people out there about what new technologies out there, how are you using it, helping them think through the bigger kind of picture of how that would be deployed and what the impacts would be. And a good example of that is we're working with a company called Nova Mira at the moment, who's got their sustainable mining by drilling technology. And essentially they drill from surface, and they're able to cherry pick material out of typically narrow vein deposits. And it's quite revolutionary in terms of the fact that you don't have to now drill out or mine out all this waste material just to get to a select piece of ore that's actually valuable. So, we've helped them develop their economic model around that. But prior to that, just understanding, okay, you've got the drilling technology, but you need all this other infrastructure to support it. You need to process this now. And so we kind of packaged that all up into a bit of a conceptual design, and then put the economic model to say, this is the size of the price.
Yeah, I could see that being a game changer. I mean, what are you looking at from a schedule standpoint? I would have to imagine it's less expensive, and two, I would imagine it's faster. Can you give some context to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the game changer, really, is you're moving from an environment now, which is you have to spend heaps of capital, these long project development durations, where literally now you can mobilize a drill into the field within a couple of weeks, let's call it, and start drilling straight away, and be in production, super rapidly. And so, equally, you can demobilize that when the commodity prices fall, and react to the market. So this is the kind of the paradigm shift that we're going to see going forward.
That's we'll have to keep that one on the list of things to watch, because I could see, like, to use your words, I could see that being a game changer. No question about it. So with that, give me your thoughts around collaboration. I liked what you said, that not everybody can be an expert in everything, so you've got to collaborate. I think let's chat about that a bit, because it's near and dear to my heart, and something that we're really focused on from our business and advising our clients. So I'd be really interested to get some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. And going back to that presentation I gave to CIM, what I touched on there was, this kind of the formation of this gig economy.
Hmm.
And what we're seeing is a lot of engineers and just project people in general, the way they're being treated by EPCMs. And again, this is no fault of the EPCMs themselves. It's just an outcome of the system. But they've been treated on a hire and fire basis. And
Right.
so with that, the employees are essentially taking the risk now of projects being there and not being there, so having work.
Hmm.
And so it really promotes the kind of the consultant mentality. And so
Sure.
what I'm seeing, and I don't know if it's just because I'm in the space and I'm seeing it more now, probably a little bit,
Sure.
is that there's more consultants out there, and they're okay to take risk because the alternative is you're taking the risk anyway, but getting very little reward. So in line with that, what we're seeing is this collaboration of specialist consultants now coming together and forming project teams. And you kind of having the best of each discipline and coming together and executing the project, as opposed to going to one sole supplier, one sole contractor, let's call them,
Hmm.
and kind of get the A team on engineering, the B team on procurement, and maybe the C team on construction. And you kind of got to manage your way through that. Here you can get the best of breed across the board.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I see the same thing. I mean, one of the things that we do, as you know, is we help our clients form a marriage or a partnership with a prime contractor to execute a capital project. And a huge part of our emphasis is on the people, on the teams, and how they work together. I want to comment on one thing you said. You were cautious about not diming out the contractors, which I think is appropriate. But I'll take it one step further and say I don't blame the contractors personally, and I don't want to say blame, but I think there's some responsibility for the mining companies to take on the notion of driving contractors down to the bare minimum price and looking at engineers or procurement professionals as a commodity and trying to whittle down profits, which in my mind has resulted in a contractor base that just doesn't have the bandwidth and doesn't have the capacity because they no longer have the overhead and the profit to carry a big bench and train people too. So I think what you're saying is absolutely accurate from the standpoint of the hire and fire model and employees taking on the risk. Because I yeah, I would agree with you. I would also agree with you that there is a lot of collaboration going on out there. The gig economy. What I would agree with that. I also believe that there's opportunity for owners and contractors to come together in more collaborative ways. Same goals, same incentives, same risk to the extent that you can, but getting people to beat to the same drum or the same sheet of music seems to make a lot of sense to me. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge with this more um, gig economy approach is that incentivizing everyone to pull in the same direction is the real challenge there, because you've got now people that are very specialized and very skilled at what they do.
Sure.
But again, it's trying to get them to align to the ultimate project outcomes is the key. And so incentives, I think commercial incentives can work there, but I think also what helps a lot is just culture. And so if
Hmm.
you've got a leadership team that really allows and drives that culture of focusing on the end goal rather than your individual specific problems,
Sure.
then I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, what did I hear the other day? Purpose driven, culture first based companies. I know for
Yes.
us that's really important in building our business. making sure the culture and our beliefs and our values are very very well represented. And I think that goes a long way to culture, because I think that's right. At the end of the day, we're we're all people, and it's the beliefs and values that we have that really shape how we make decisions. So I think that culture is really critical. And then to your point, what are the incentives that you can layer into the equation so that people are driven to the same endpoint? So something really interesting to think about. I uh i think it's the way of the future, and I've been saying that to anybody who's willing to listen, is I just don't see the status quo being the answer for the industry. To that end, I'm really looking forward to the upcoming Mining Mavericks Roundtable, where we're going to talk about partnerships and personalities, and then to be joined by a PhD in psychology, I think is going to make everyone around the table a little bit smarter. So I'm really looking forward to that. But I do believe that collaborative models are going to be one of the go-tos in the future if we can get it right. We've got to get it right, but I certainly want to try. I don't know what you think there.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, if I look back on my career, on the projects that were the most successful, those were the ones where you couldn't really tell, if you were an outsider and you walked into the office, who exactly the owner's team was, who exactly the EPCM was, who the contractor was. Everyone was just kind of focused on doing the work. And I think these us and we approaches really
Mm.
don't get us very far. And I think that's been proven time and time again.
So let's chat about that a little bit. I agree with you, by the way. The inverse is horrible. I mean, you can just feel the energy in the room when you've got people that are, just fighting with each other. You've got owners that are trying to whip the contractors into submission. It's hard to watch, and it doesn't
Yeah.
work. But maybe if you could, if you remember, what are some of the key components of those projects that you were involved with where people were working together? What do you think were some of the driving factors or driving forces behind that team spirit or that collaboration?
Yeah, and I think the relationship between the owner and the EPCM, or whatever you want to call them, the
Yep.
contractor,
Sure.
that fundamentally needs to be driven again by leadership. And so if you have two leaders there that are driving feudal behavior, obviously that's going to trickle down and kind of it's going to get exaggerated. So my recollection of what worked there was is owners sitting in the office next door to me.
Mm,
I literally I could go next door and kind of just pick the guy's brains, have a cup of tea with him, and
sure.
say, "What do you think of this?" And he'd tell me, "No, that's complete BS. It'll never fly." And I'd say, "Okay, fine," and I'd go and try and find another way to do it. But
Sure.
it's that kind of interaction that you need to drive forward the projects forward and solve problems, because you know fundamentally the technical piece of projects is relatively simple, and the problem with projects and where things fall down are with people and interfaces. And so when you have people interfaces, that's where it really gets tricky. So it's about building relationships, and building that team.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you, Ken. Thank you for that. And trust. One of the things that we commonly hear as we speak with leaders throughout the industry is it just, in so many cases, it comes down to one, relationships, but then two, building that rapport, building that trust, so that you can knock on the door of the owner's rep and say, "Hey, I want to do that," and he or she can say, "Hey, Ken, that's stupid. Don't do that." And they're like, "Okay, well, I'll try something else." But to have that latitude and that freedom and that ability to trust each other, I think is really key. And the only way that I know how to build that trust is through relationships, which is why I see so much upside in the collaboration. So What do you think we can do better there? I mean, what are some of your thoughts around improving those dynamics of the us them? You know, I say master slave, just the whipping into submission thing. What are some of your thoughts around what we can do better in that space?
So I think, I've been seeing this terminology being thrown around recently called the Integrated Project Team, IPT. And I've been trying to figure that out for my own purposes, exactly what they mean by that, because a lot of the teams I've worked in would probably fit in that same definition,
Mm,
although they weren't really structured that way to begin with.
okay.
And again, it's about creating a team where the pecking order doesn't really matter too much, but the philosophy and the strategy of the parent organization filters through. I think that's what you're trying to get to. So certainly that IPT approach, if you formalize that, I think can work, and I've seen it work, where you have in fact owners representatives in the engineering team, you have them as part of the procurement team and so on, and everyone works together. It kind of cuts out a lot of the bureaucracy as well, and the shift of risk. I think that's the other big thing is really just trying to walk away from this. Okay, well, this is my risk, that's your risk, and there's a clear boundary. I think once you start to say, okay, well, let's put that aside, let's focus again on the project outcomes, which are both our priority.
All right.
You get to more collaborative outcomes and better outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely agree. It's tough to do though. I think there's a lot of thinking that I see in the market of an unequal footing. I see a lot of instances where not all mining companies, but certainly there's personalities within the companies that I'm associated with that just believe you can whip somebody into submission. And it's, to me, you watch it and you see, well, this isn't working. Like, clearly the project is behind, the quality's bad, the cost is overrunning, yet you continue to whip and continue to beat and kick and drag, but it doesn't work. And to me, it's like, do you not see that this is not working? Change your approach. It's the definition of insanity, but it's out there. So it's refreshing, Ken, to hear somebody with your background and your expertise that is honing in on that and believes in that, because I think we share a lot of the same perspective in that regard. So
And maybe,
go ahead.
Jason, if I could
No,
just
please.
jump
Yeah,
in,
please.
just related to that, I think the other big challenge we have around that is just skills in general.
Mm,
And the mining industry, especially in the projects world, is coming out of a quite a long period of decline.
right.
And you can see that sharp uptick coming soon. And the
Absolutely.
amount of resources we have that are appropriately skilled versus what we need in the future, there's a big gap. And so ultimately what's going to happen is you're going to have juniors coming through being totally out of their depth,
Mm,
and these negative outcomes happening. And so again, it's going to take a big effort from mentors and leaders and so on to train up and mentor these younger generation to come through to be able to actually do these projects that are coming through. And that trust relationship kind of tends to degenerate when you don't have
sure.
the appropriate people and skills on board. And so this is going to be the interesting dynamic is to say, acknowledge to yourself that, look, this is the situation we're in. Regardless of what we do, we're not going to get better resources.
Mm.
We need to make do with what we have. And so how do we do that? And so the question, or the answer to that, I think, is just to be humble, and pull up or roll up your sleeves and just get stuck in and build that team. It's going to be a big effort.
It is, man, but it's coming. It's upon us already to an extent, but I think it's only going to be exacerbated as commodity prices continue to rise. I think they'll stable out, and projects that were not economic before are going to get some traction and get built. With that, Ken, I'm really interested. You hit on something, and I think that's key, is around the resource pool within the industry, but also how do we make mining sexy again? How do we get people excited and bring new generations into the industry? Be curious what you think about that.
Yeah, it's a interesting question, because what motivates each generation, is very different from the previous one. And so,
Totally.
you know, yeah, people have a tendency to go back and kind of reflect on their own experience and say, okay, well, this is what drove me. And I could speak to that, but I'd probably be totally off base. But, from what I'm told, is driving, the Gen Ys and even the Gen Zs now is, they want to primarily make a difference and feel like they're
Mm,
contributing to something that's worthwhile, meaningful, and sustainable. And I think, that fundamentally is not in the current model where you're being
mm,
cracked by a whip every day and told to deliver your piece of paper. So um, that's got to change. I think the other thing is related to that is technology adoption as well.
mm,
Working smarter, not harder. There's again, innovation is not a technology problem. There's plenty of technologies out there. What we have is a people and adoption problem, and a risk taking problem. And so again, it's creating an environment where you feel like you are actively contributing, even if it's in a small little portion of the project, but you're improving that portion. I think that's what it's going to make the big difference.
yeah, I think that's really insightful. I would agree with you, and I know you're a lot closer to the coalface on innovation than I am, but I think you're right with the newer generations in terms of making an impact. When I speak with generations that are our age younger, one of the words that I hear all of the time is like, I just want to make an impact. I want to make an impact. That's what I want, which I think is cool. But I also think the current model, at least in most cases, from a macro standpoint, don't support that initiative or that drive or that desire to make an impact. Not that it can't. It's just and there are instances of it, but I would say as a general rule, I wouldn't see that as being the major theme behind what we're driving to. So yeah, I think it's good. And then the innovation piece, it's an interesting perspective that all of the innovation is out there and the technology is out there. It's just an adoption, a people issue, a risk issue, an adoption issue. What are some more thoughts there? It's interesting. Be curious.
Yeah, the other thing related to that is I work for a company called Inspire Resources as well, and a very progressive thinking company, where we've developed this concept of a vicious cycle.
Mm,
Um, and, again, going back to the system thinkers approach,
sure.
you, you start to figure out that what's hindering innovation. And in fact, there's a big correlation between environmental
Mm,
outcomes and innovation. If, for example, if you were to use Nova Mirror's technology, you wouldn't have to mine all this waste, and so you have a much smaller footprint
sure.
immediately. And so there's this huge correlation there. But if you start to cycle back, then what kind of drives, what stops innovation? It's risk taking. And so you're not able to take risks because the projects that you're trying to implement these things are too big. And this is the whole mega project philosophy. And if you go back to what's kind of driving that, it's then the economics and shareholder primacy.
Mm,
And what drives shareholder primacy is yeah, it's just general economics. So if you can change if you can change the the strategy that investors are adopting in terms of accommodating risk ultimately, you can drive that all down to the bottom and start to take more risk and implement more innovation, which results in much better outcomes in terms of social impact, environmental impact, and so on and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And I had the opportunity to sit down with Andy Reynolds from Inspire Resources a couple of weeks ago, and he walked me through the model that you guys had developed that shows um, the the reliance, I guess, on major heavy capital projects and why that happens. And I think there's a lot of truth to what you guys are portraying there and what you guys are, or not portraying, what you guys are showing there, highlighting there. And I think there's a lot to that, and I find it really interesting, and I think others would as well. One of the things that I really want to ask you, Ken, Carly Leonida from the Intelligent Miner put this on me the other day, and I thought it was a really good question, and one I thought would be worthwhile to ask you. You know, where do you see the industry in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? What do we have in store for us?
So I guess there's a difference between what do I hope
Yeah, give me
and
what do
what
you
do I
want? What do you
see
want?
in
And what do you
reality.
think?
So
Absolutely.
I guess I could answer both. I mean, what I really hope for is that, you know, the I think we have a generational problem here
Mm,
related to the ability to take risks and adopt new thinking and so on. And so that generation would have shifted out, and we'll
okay.
have a middle management that hopefully buys into the need for actively changing the mining industry in general to create, you know, better outcomes, better social license, all these good things that are becoming increasingly important. And so I hope they've adopted by that point some of that thinking and are making disruptive change in terms of accommodating these newer technologies, newer ways of working. You know, for example, I mean, a really easy example is this remote working.
Hmm.
And you know, I was doing this at management consulting like for about 3-4 years prior to COVID, and it
Okay.
was everyone thought it was insane. What it was this hoteling policy, working remotely, um, and when you propose that to people at that point, just in regular businesses, they're like, "No, we could never work like that."
Right.
But you know, here comes COVID, disrupts the
Yeah.
whole thing, and you're essentially forced to change. And you change, and you go, well, that actually wasn't too bad. And so, you know, we could probably continue like this going forward because we're saving a whole lot of money on rentals and stuff like that. So
Sure.
uh, it's that type of thinking and risk taking that I think we need to see in the future. And you know, in
I
terms
like
of
it.
what I see as a real outcome, we'll probably only get halfway there. And you know, the transition in the mining industry is really, really slow. Although technology is advancing very quickly, I think the uptake is still going to be slow, to be honest. But I'm hoping through the likes of ourselves, we can influence a lot of that decision making and drive more change.
Yeah, no, and I share your vision with that, and I think it is incumbent on us, the what I would say the new generation of leaders. Not that anything is bad about those that came before us, but I do see that there is a subculture of individuals and of companies, for that matter, that see things differently and that want to change. So I think there is a desire within a subset of the market to look at how we've done things and then think about where we want to go and reverse engineer our way back to that. You're absolutely right in there, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to feature you today on the Mavericks, because I know the way that you think, and I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you speaking up about it as well. I think that that's admirable. So, Ken, well, first of all, I really appreciate the conversation. I always do. Every time we chat, I learn something new, and I love that about you. So, thank you for that. But before we sign off, I'll ask you if you have any closing thoughts, anything that we didn't get to that you really wanted to talk about. One, but then two, you know, how people can can find Captrix, can find Inspire, they can find, Ken Murray if they want to. So maybe final thoughts, and then let us know where we can find you, Ken.
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity, Jason. It's always good to talk
Absolutely.
about how to make things better. And again, that's part of why I formed Captrix. Yeah, so in terms of Captrix and how to get hold of us, we've got a website, www.captrixconsulting.com. My contact details are on there, and you can read about the stuff we do. But again, we're focused on improving and integrating project management and innovation across the mining industry.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. That's great, and we'll make sure to link that up in the show notes. But once again, appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to chat with us. And I think I think your perspective is very valuable, and certainly something that I want to share with our community, with our industry. So thank you for taking the time, Ken.
Awesome, pleasure to be here.
All right, Ken. All right.